Well, folks, there are a bunch of very hot Senate races this year, 2024. I wanted to give you the opportunity to meet some of the Republican candidates in these races. I've been out on the trail with some of these candidates. They're wonderful people, and they deserve your support. We're going to go through some of them one by one. We're joined on the line by Senate candidate from Pennsylvania, Dave McCormick. You, of course, know him. He's been running for this position for a year at this point, and he is running a neck-and-neck race with Bob Casey, who's one of the toughest outs in the Senate, and he's running an extraordinary race. He is running from behind. The race has been moved from lean Casey to now toss-up in the last round of Cook Political. Dave, you're running an amazing race. Tell us, first of all, why you got into the race. For people who don't know much about you, who don't know your background, talk about it a little bit.
Yeah, thanks, Ben. Great to be with you. You know, I ran a primary in 22 and I lost a primary by 900 votes. And when I was thinking about running again, it's just the state of America. I think we're in deep trouble economically. I think we're in deep trouble spiritually. I think our adversaries around the world are testing us, and we need new leadership. And Kamala Harris is a disastrous selection if she were to be president. And Bob Casey is a 98% vote. And so for me, it's the race is about change versus the status quo. And it's about a seventh generation Pennsylvanian, a West Point graduate, a combat vet from Iraq, a business guy, an outsider against truly the definition of a career politician. Bob Casey's been in office for 30 years, the Senate for 18 years. He's been weak. Whenever the bullets start flying, he ducks. And he's increasingly voted for this radical liberal agenda, which has been counter to Pennsylvania, everything from banning fracking to defunding the police to biological men competing in women's sports. So that's the difference. It's really a change election, and I think Pennsylvania's one change.
You know, one of the amazing things about the race that you're running is obviously Josh Shapiro is governor of Pennsylvania. He's a very popular governor of Pennsylvania. And so if you were just looking at the raw stats, if you're looking at the raw situation on the ground in Pennsylvania, you'd imagine that you would have this massive deficit that you'd have to overcome. Donald Trump, of course, is running about even in Pennsylvania right now. That's a toss-up state. And you have managed to run, again, an extraordinary campaign. Many of the best ads of this campaign have come from your campaign. I'm talking about national ads that are directed against the Democratic Party. What's been your strategy in this campaign?
Well, I think that, the challenge was I'm not well known. And so I've had to build up my name ID. But Bob Casey, went to Washington saying he was going to change Washington 18 years ago, and Washington changed Bob Casey. So the key is not to try to attack Bob Casey's, who he is as a person, but to say this guy is completely out of step with Pennsylvania. And when Kamala Harris came onto the ticket, I think Pennsylvania may be the one place where Joe Biden was better for the Democrats than Kamala Harris, because Joe Biden had Scranton connections. He had campaigned here for 50 years. Union leaders, county commissioners, they all knew Joe. And Kamala Harris, in her own words, is a radical, extreme San Francisco liberal. So banning fracking, confiscating guns, legal citizenship for illegal immigrants, eliminating private healthcare insurance. These are the things she said in the last few years. And so the key when she became the nominee was to make sure people knew that Bob Casey is a sure vote. He's someone who has shown himself to be weak and liberal. And if you don't like Kamala Harris, you're sure not going to like Bob Casey, because he's going to be with her every step of the way. And that's the way the race has evolved. And that change message is more important now than ever, because about 75% of Pennsylvanians, 80%, 75 to 80%, think we're going in the wrong direction as a country. So Bob Casey's had his shot. He's not going to change things. I will.
I mean, Dave, one of the things that Bob Casey said in the debate that you had with him was pretty astonishing, which is he basically admitted that he wants to kill the filibuster, which is an incredibly scary proposition to those of us who watch the workings of government. The possibility of Kamala Harris with a Democratic Senate, which theoretically could happen, right? I mean, the Republicans are on a knife's edge in the Senate. Presumably, they're going to pick up the seat in West Virginia. Tim Sheehy looks like he's leading his race in Montana. I campaigned with him there the other day. But, your seat matters an awful lot. Democrats with a majority in the Senate, or with a tie break in the Senate, they would immediately ram through a killing of the filibuster. They would expand the Supreme Court. They would probably add a couple of states to the United States, thus stacking the Senate permanently. They would pass a bunch of legislation that would permanently wreck the voting procedures of the United States. And Bob Casey is all for that. This is not a candidacy for Bob Casey of sobriety and moderation. He's trying to play sober and moderate. He is not sober. He is not moderate.
No, you're absolutely right. And the imagining what happens if there's a Kamala Harris in the White House, a Democratic majority, and you eliminate the filibuster, a Green New Deal that would would destroy our industrial economy, as you said, two new states and senators from those states. The most important thing to recognize, it's irreversible. If we were to go down that path, it'd be irreversible, and the balance of power in our country would be shifted, and we wouldn't be able to take it back. Which is why I keep saying, we've heard politicians say this forever, but this truly is the most important election of our lifetimes, of my lifetime, I believe, and that's why I'm so committed to running. I've said that I would support maintain the filibuster regardless of who was in the majority and regardless of who was in the White House, because I think it is a check on extremism. And boy, we've got some extreme ideas on behalf of the Democratic Party that will truly destroy the America we love, the basic tenets of meritocracy and free enterprise that's made America the country it is.
Well, Dave, obviously you have the momentum in the race. The big question that I've had, I think a lot of Republican commentators have had about a wide variety of Senate races and the national race as well, is what does the ground game look like? You hear a lot of conflicting information, state to state party to state party. What does the ground game look like for your campaign in Pennsylvania and also for the presidential in Pennsylvania, which, again, if Trump wins Pennsylvania, this election is over. He's the president.
Yeah, I mean, the Trump campaign and my campaign have been very aligned on this. And, I think there's a lot of good leading indicators. I think the most pressing one or important one is that the voter registration has moved radically. So when President Trump won in 2016, we had 1 million more registered Democrats than Republicans. As of yesterday, it was 298,000, a 700,000 registered voter move. That coupled with an enormous effort to get mail-in ballots out into our low propensity voters among Republicans, those numbers have shifted dramatically too. And then in Pennsylvania, which is unprecedented, we have 5 million doors that will be knocked by Election Day. Millions already knocked. And that's a combination of outside groups and internal ground game. And so I think what you're seeing is the Republican Party united, which it hasn't been in Pennsylvania for quite some time, united around whatever differences we have among Republicans. They're small compared to the radical agenda that Kamala Harris and Bob Casey would put into place. And so, listen, this is going to be a very close race for President Trump, a very close race for me. But I feel like that momentum on the ground is very meaningful. And the energy, whenever I go anywhere, the energy is enormous. And the thing I want to say, Ben, is they're non-traditional folks that come up to me. A lot of union guys come up and say, hey, we're with you. We recognize we got to unlock our energy sector to have great jobs in Pennsylvania. Minorities, I'm in Philadelphia today, and the minority community, I got a lot of people that come up to me and say, listen, we got your back. And so I think you're going to see an interesting coalition here for President Trump, certainly. And I think for me, that's going to be able to have us both win. And it's going to be a meaningful shift for the country. And, Pennsylvania is the Keystone State. It's called the Keystone State for a reason. What happens in Pennsylvania truly will determine the direction of the country. Believe it or not, there's still 6-7% of the vote that don't know voters that don't know me that well, despite a very significant investment on both sides. So I'm going to do that, and I'm moving focus my attention on persuadable voters. So people that are swing voters that are on the fence. I'm as you know, spending a lot of time with the Jewish community. We have 300,000 Jewish voters in Pennsylvania. 80% of them are Democrats, but they're deeply troubled by the way the Democratic Party has dealt with Israel and not stood with Israel in its time of existential crisis and not combated anti-Semitism here at home. And Bob Casey has been a weak voice. He voted for the Iran deal, which Iran's used that $100 billion of sanctioned money to underwrite terrorist proxies across the Middle East. And he's been a weak voice of fighting anti-Semitism, including endorsing and not withdrawing his endorsement from Summer Lee, who's my congresswoman in Pittsburgh, who's an avowed anti-Semite. So that is one of a handful of groups that I'm spending a lot of time with to make sure they understand the contrast and the choice, again, strength and weakness, common sense versus a radical liberal agenda that's truly, in my heart, I believe is going to destroy our country if we don't turn the tide.
Well, that is Dave McCormick, the next senator from Pennsylvania. That is a seat that Republicans definitely need to win. And if Dave wins that seat in the Senate, it is almost certain that Donald Trump will also win that state in the presidential race. It's a huge state. It's a huge race. Dave, thanks so much for your time, and thanks for running.
Thank you, Ben.
Well, joining us on the line is Tim Sheehy. He, of course, is a Senate candidate in the state of Montana, where he is fighting a battle with Jon Tester. He is currently winning that battle. He is the deciding vote in the United States Senate, considering Jim Justice is very likely to take the West Virginia Senate seat. That means that Tim Sheehy is Senate vote number 51, the most crucial vote in the United States Senate. Tim, thanks so much for joining the program. Really appreciate it.
Great to see you, Ben. Thanks for making the trip out last week.
Yeah, no, it's wonderful to be there. It's an amazing crowd. Obviously, it's a great state, and you are running a tremendous campaign. The energy in the room was absolutely astounding watching you speak. Governor Gianforte was there as well. 1,500 people showing up in what for Floridians is very cold weather to see. It was very, very cool. So for folks who don't know your story, Tim, why don't you tell them how you got into politics in the first place? Because honestly, politics sucks, and getting into it, especially as a successful business person, is a sacrifice. How did you end up in the place you are right now?
Well, you're absolutely right, Ben. I mean, today's political discourse, as we know, is unfortunately pretty toxic, but all the more reason why good people have to get involved. And unfortunately, the environment's deterring good people from getting involved. But in that very conundrum is why we must get involved. And I served as a Navy SEAL officer. My wife was a Marine Corps officer. We met in the military. We're both veterans of the Afghan War. And when I came home, I got injured in service, was discharged, and we started our businesses here. Aerial firefighting is our business. We fight wildfires from the air. And we took the technology and tactics we learned overseas and applied it to fight wildfires safer and more effectively, and have built some great business success doing that. But when I watched Afghanistan collapse in the fall of 2021, for me, that was, for so many of us who served there, it was just a seminal moment in our lifetime in a very bad way. In many ways, it was kind of a universe collapsing moment where you look back and say, why did we sacrifice so much? Why did we friends get killed? Why did people get wounded? Why did we miss birthdays and anniversaries? Why did we dedicate so much to a cause we believed in, and then watch that cause literally just dishonored, disgraced by our own government? And in the wake of that, we worked so hard to get some of our Afghan allies out and get them out safely before they were murdered by the Taliban. And in the wake of that, I realized that we were facing a crossroads as a nation. And we were facing a crossroads that really was going to determine whether we were going to continue to be a great nation or whether we were going to be a nation in decline. And for that, everyone gets involved in politics. Something else, gets them there for a different reason. They didn't put a stop sign on my intersection, or my taxes went up, or something. For me, that this was it. And I started getting involved in politics after that because I realized, if you're not involved in the solution, you have no right to complain about the problem. And I couldn't sit there and complain about the Biden administration and what they were doing, what they'd done to my sacrifice and that of my brothers and sisters and my wife. And I couldn't complain about what they were doing to this country if I wasn't actively involved in trying to fix it. So that got me involved at first as a surrogate speaker and a donor. And then along the way, some folks I respect said, hey, you're pretty good at this. We need somebody to run this very important race. Would you be willing to do this? And that's how we got here. And as you said, we're winning. It's been a grassroots campaign. We've been outspent like 5-1. The media, of course, has done everything they can to destroy me and my family, my business, regardless of the truth. And we're winning. So I think it's a good sign for America, and it's a good sign for Montana.
So, Tim, obviously, Jon Tester, the person you've been running against, he is a person who portrays himself as sort of a blue-collar moderate. He's actually been in the Senate since 2007. He was in the Montana Senate since 1999. So he's been there. He's been a career politician, essentially, for the last 25 years. What are sort of the lead tip of the spear points of attack, you think, against his terms in the Senate? What has he not done that he should have done?
At the end of the day, he is a loyal Democrat vote. He is a part of the swamp. Ronnie Jackson was here yesterday, traveling the state with me. And Ronnie Jackson, as you probably know, has a very personal experience with Jon Tester because he smeared him and destroyed his career because Ronnie was nominated to lead and reform the VA under President Trump. And oddly enough, here's the crazy thing about Ronnie's mission. It was to fix the VA so it actually worked for veterans. And nothing scared institutions more than accountability and expectation actually to do your job. And Jon Tester, being a bought and sold swamp creature, recognized a threat to his status quo as the ranking member of the VA committee, and torpedoed Ronnie for that reason. And I think I tell that story because it really is insight into Jon Tester's entire political universe, which is he is a foot soldier for Chuck Schumer and the Democrats. He always has been. He pretends to be a moderate, pretends to be he's running commercials now. He voted to impeach Donald Trump twice. Yet he runs commercials talking about how close he is with Donald Trump. And as you all know, many of these Senate candidates are doing the same thing. They're running from Kamala as fast as they can because they see the writing on the wall. And now they're embracing someone that in one breath they call him a fascist and a Nazi, and they call him all the worst things you can possibly call someone in modern day America. Yet at the same time, they're running commercials talking about how they're his best friend and they support his policies. And when he was in office, they worked with him. And that really encapsulates Senator Tester's career, which is go to D.C., vote like a dyed-in-the-wool liberal, be the number one recipient of lobbyist cash, top recipient of dark money, and then come back to Montana and pretend you're voting for Montana every day, when in fact, you're selling everybody out in D.C. with every single vote you take. And that's the truth that has moved us up in the polls.
Yeah, Tim, while we were out there on the trail, one of the things that I was talking about with the voters is the importance of you being the 51st vote for a couple of reasons. One is obviously that if Donald Trump is elected, as we all hope and pray that he will be, that you'll be the guy who's helping to move forward his legislation, whether we're talking about strengthening national defense or whether we're talking about lowering regulations. And if, God forbid, he's not elected and Kamala Harris becomes president of the United States, you are the bulwark between the Democratic Party and the complete restructuring of American government. I wonder if you want to talk about the importance of that 51st vote.
100%. And it's so critical because either way the White House goes, we have to have the Senate. And I think that's a message that I've been driving home for 18 months. That's the message that when I fully started to understand this is what part of what drove me to get into this race is, to be quite honest, being a senator is not something I've ever aspired to. And frankly, it sounds like a terrible job. You sit there all day and argue with old men and women and, largely get nothing done. But in effect, that's what the framers viewed the Senate as. The Senate was the firewall against radical change. They intended it that way. It was designed that way by some of the wisest men in the history of the world when they crafted our Constitution. The House is the raw representation of the people, and the presidency is a once removed representation of the will of the people. And the Senate is one step further removed to ensure that radical changes that people may think is a good idea now have time to be properly considered, and of course have to pass, a supermajority vote. And then, of course, the final check and balance is our Supreme Court. And what the Democrats have said they wanted to do, and this isn't some conspiracy theory hyperbole, they've said as much that they've written it in their policy documents. They want to eliminate the legislative filibuster in the U.S. Senate. Then they want to add one or two more states, D.C. and Puerto Rico. That's 4 more Democrat senators. And then with that majority, pass radical legislation like, quote unquote, reforming the Supreme Court. And what does reforming the Supreme Court mean to Democrats? It means packing it with progressive judges that become a rubber stamp for these globalist issues that they've been trying to force on us and have forced on us for the last 3.5 years. All that can be stopped by the U.S. Senate. And I think for Montana specifically, reminding them that the pain they've experienced the last 3.5 years in a state that's going to go 20 points for Trump, that is sick of expensive gasoline, that's sick of crime in the streets, sick of a 250% increase in human trafficking in our state, sick and tired of not being able to afford groceries, sick and tired of seeing us send billions and billions of dollars overseas as our own country crumbles. They look at this and say, they may not make that connection, that the Senate, John Tester's specific vote, his sole vote in the last 3.5 years could have put a stop to so much of this carnage. And he didn't, because he's bought and paid for by the Democrats and the special interests. So that, continuum of issues has to have a Senate controlled by the Republicans. Because if Trump wins, he'll be impeached day one if we don't have the Senate, because they already impeached him twice. And if he doesn't win, God forbid, that is our firewall against another Biden, Kamala radical. Now with Waltz there, the most radical guy we've ever seen on any ticket. We're giving them unchecked power to have, a further 4 years of what we've already seen. And if you think the last 4 years is bad, wait till you get Kamala and Tim Waltz in there and then see what they're going to do. So that's why the Senate, no matter what, we have to win this seat. It's arguably the most important race in the country after the White House. Luckily, we're looking good. The hard work of the last 1.5 years is paying off. We just got to keep the pressure on the finish line.
This is the most important Senate race in the country because if Republicans do not take this Senate seat in Montana, then it's very likely, very highly probable, if they can't take that Senate seat, they're probably not going to take the other swing seats as well. So this is the sort of firewall seat for Republicans. Plus, Tim Sheehy is going to make an amazing senator from the state of Montana. Tim, congrats on the way you've run the race, and really good luck going forward. Looking forward to seeing you in Washington, D.C.
Thanks for your support, Ben. We got to save this country. TimForMT.com. Let's get it done.
We'll get to more on this in a moment. First, using the internet without ExpressVPN, it's like asking a stranger to take a photo using your phone. Most of the time, probably fine. What if they take your phone and just run away with it? Well, you know who wants your data? Hackers. They don't need to be some elite cybercriminal mastermind to get it. Every time you connect to an unencrypted network at a cafe, hotel, airport, any hacker on that same network can gain access to your personal data. We're talking passwords, financial details, everything. Get this. It only takes some cheap hardware to do it. Smart 12-year-olds could literally hack your device while you're ordering your morning coffee. Your data It's valuable. Hackers can make up to $1,000 per person selling personal information on the dark web. That's why I use ExpressVPN. I've been using them for years. ExpressVPN creates a secure encrypted tunnel between your device and the internet. It's so secure it would take a hacker with a supercomputer over 1 billion years to get past their encryption. We're talking 1 billion years. That's a long time. You won't be alive by then. Plus, one of my favorite parts is it's incredibly easy to use. You just fire up that app, click one button, and now you're protected. It works on all your devices, phones, laptops, tablets, everything, so you can stay secure wherever you go. Secure your online data today the way I do. Scan that QR code on screen, click the link in the description, or visit expressvpn.com/BenYT. That's expressvpn.com/BenYT to get 3 extra months for free. expressvpn.com/BenYT right now to learn more. Joining us on the line is Eric Hovde. He is the Senate candidate on the Republican side of the aisle in Wisconsin. That race has gotten really, really close. In fact, Cook Political Report just shifted the race to toss-up status. Eric, thanks so much for joining the show. Really appreciate it.
It's great being on your show, Ben.
Well, Eric, I had the opportunity to go campaign with you a little bit in Wisconsin a couple of weeks ago. Obviously, there's a lot of juice on the ground. We were sensing, even a couple of weeks ago, that the momentum had moved in your favor. It seems pretty clear that that's the way that this race is now moving. Where do you assess the race to be right now?
Look, most internal polls have it a jump ball race, a tied race. We had one poll that shows we're up 1% now. So the momentum's clearly on our side. And look, everybody knows in the world of business or sports, momentum is so critically important. And in politics, it's probably more important than any area because you have this defined date and we're charging to it. So I feel really good about it. They're in panic mode. They're continuing to drop a lot of money, attacking me, making up all kinds of crazy things like I want to take away Social Security, or I support a national abortion ban when I've said from day one I'm opposed to that. So you can tell they're in panic mode. So I feel good about the race.
So let's talk a little bit and introduce you to the audience, because when it comes to these Senate races, obviously people in Wisconsin know you. There's a national show and with a national audience. And so I want people to kind of understand the contrast between you and Tammy Baldwin, the multi-term senator from Wisconsin. So why don't you do a bit about your background, how you got into the business of politics after being very successful in the business of business, and also why you're running against Tammy Baldwin.
Sure. So I'm a 4th-generation Wisconsinite. Hovde means head of the mountain. It's Norwegian, and that's where my ancestors came from in 1905 and settled here in Wisconsin. I raised public school kid. I went on to University of Wisconsin, and then I went out into the business world, and I'm just one of those guys who had a knack for business. So I started my first company in my 20s, and by 30, I'd started a couple others. My main business has been for the last almost 30 years, buying and turn around community banks. And I have a real estate development company here in Wisconsin where we develop apartments, but we own office, land development, a variety of things. But I've been in a lot of different companies. So I've been blessed, and I understand how our economy works at a very deep level. Most importantly, I'm married. I have 2 daughters and 3 grandchildren, the blessings of my life. I also was diagnosed with MS at the age of 27. Talk about a shock. I fought martial arts. I was 6'3", 225 pounds, pretty much muscle, thought I was Superman. Then you get hit with this diagnosis. And I went through a lot of hard years. But fortunately, at the age of 40, my MS took a turn for the better. And it's so ironic because I used to pray to God, just give me till 40 so my daughters would know the man I am. That propelled me to start my Hovde Foundation, first funding medical research in MS, but then I started to expand the focus to rescuing abandoned children left to the streets, or pulling them out of and rescuing them from that horror. So we have Hovde homes around the world, 4 in Africa, 5 in Central South America. We have a home here in Wisconsin for single moms. I've been fighting against for a long time in this country. And, I'm involved in a variety of ways, drug addiction centers, food banks, because I believe too much is given, much is expected. It's my Christian faith. And why did I get into this race? Real simple. I love my country, and our country's failing right now. And I couldn't sit on the sideline and just watch this wonderful country called America. We've been blessed with the greatest country in the history of mankind to just get melted away. And we're bankrupting ourselves, and we'll get into probably the reasons. But fundamentally, I just love my country, Ben.
So let's talk about the person running against Tammy Baldwin. So she's been senator from Wisconsin for a couple of terms at this point. And the kind of public perception of her is, I think, as a person who's significantly more moderate than her voting record would show. What are chief critiques of Tammy Baldwin's performance in the Senate?
Look, she is very progressive left. She runs back here, as you said, as a moderate outside of Madison, which is very progressive left. But she's typically voted one of the top three most liberal senators, voted with Joe Biden 95.5% of the time. She's a rubber stamp to whatever the progressive left wants. When she's been in politics her whole life, 39 years, literally graduated from college, ran for the Dane County Board of Supervisors, and then state assembly, then Congress for 16 years, now the Senate for 12 years. She is a big do nothing except voting for every radical thing. The one thing she's really pushes behind the scenes is all this transgender kind of stuff. She gave our taxpayer money for a transgender clinic here in Wisconsin that does this with kids without parents' notification. She's behind pushing the reform change of Title IX, which the federal government's trying to force school districts to allow guys to play in girls' sports and guys to go in girls' bathrooms and locker rooms. So she's behind that kind of stuff. But she's just a radical leftist. She's really devoid of any knowledge, as I like to say. Our healthcare system's breaking. How would she know anything about healthcare? She's never had to buy herself her own health insurance because government's always provided it to her. I've had to buy thousands of employees' health insurance, and I've had to navigate and understand how our healthcare system works. I could say the same thing about housing. I've been in the real estate development world. I understand how the problems and why housing costs so much to build. She would have no clue. Most importantly, she's played a role in bankrupting our country. When she went into office, we had $5 trillion in debt. Today, we have $36 trillion in debt. She doesn't understand the implications of that. I understand it very well.
So let's talk about some of the obstacles you faced in this campaign. Obviously, the Democrats have outspent the Republicans in the state of Wisconsin by a large margin, but it's not just that. You're also facing some entrenched opposition from big tech, which appears to be, at this point, basically stifling headlines that are harmful to Tammy Baldwin in the middle of this race. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. So, the Democratic Party is supposed to be about defending democracy. You can't even say that with a straight face because we've known what they've done to our democracy by trying to engage in censorship, weaponizing our justice system, and turning our courts into political theater and denying ballot access. But so a group of Democratic attorneys and donors and political operatives got a crazy candidate under the America First brand in my race to try to siphon off 1% or 2% of voters that will show up and think this is a person aligned with President Trump. This is a Democrat plant just to siphon off votes. So Wisconsin right now, a conservative online news site that has a pretty good traction, posted about this. And Facebook, surprise, surprise, pulls and shuts down their posts on Facebook and Instagram. So here we are, big tech doing it again, involving themselves in politics and putting their thumb on the scale to try to suppress information that's very critical to get out to conservative voters.
Yeah, so Eric, there have been a bunch of false attacks that have been levied against you. The latest ones involve the suggestion that you are trying to take people's Social Security away from them. What's your actual proposal on Social Security, and what are they lying about here?
Oh, it's insane. I've said we have to protect Social Security, that Social Security should have been put in a true trust, that we have to, try to make sure it's there for old people. What they are taking is an interview from 14 years ago where I was talking about the fact that younger people life expectancy is going to increase and could increase rather materially, and that we're going to have to make adjustments for people, 40 and younger by adding a year or two to Social Security. Because remember, Social Security was put in place in the 30s when life expectancy was 62 and the payout was 65. Today, life expectancy is 80 and the payout is still 65. So I said, nobody who's on Social Security or heading to Social Security for the next 15 plus years should have it touched. But, for younger people, we may need to add or two. So now they're trying to say, I want to take away Social Security and cut benefits. It's just, and they're saying, I want a national abortion ban. I've never said that. I've, in fact, said the people of the state of Wisconsin should vote on this through a referendum. And I'm opposed to a national abortion ban, but it's the same thing they're trying to do to President Trump. Ben, as you know, they have nothing to run on. They have failed on everything. So all they do is make up lies. And her whole campaign has been trying to get people to hate me. They said I was from California because I bought a business out there. I mean, I was born here, raised here, live here, pay my taxes here. It's rather amusing, but they've made up all kinds of crazy stuff about me.
Eric, really appreciate the time. Good luck in the race.
Thanks so much, Ben. Everybody have a great day.
Joining us on the line is Bernie Moreno. He's, of course, the Republican nominee for the U.S. Senate seat in Ohio. I had the opportunity to travel a little bit around Ohio with Bernie just a couple of weeks ago. He's an amazing candidate. Bernie, thanks so much for joining the show. Really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you for having me, Ben, and thank you for being out here. We had a great time with you. I think we put you through the ropes in terms of 5 or 6 events, but you were very well received, and people of Ohio love you.
Well, I appreciate that, and obviously had an opportunity to meet with your wife, Bridget, as well, and just wonderful people. So, Bernie, explain, first of all, kind of the state of the race. Where do things stand right now?
Yeah, so this is a very, very close race. This is a guy who's been in elected office for 50 years. The media does everything in their power to absolutely cover for him. Obviously, they attack me left and right. He also raises obscene amounts of money. This guy raised $31 million just last quarter. So the race is really tight. We knew it was going to be a hard race, and we got the momentum on our side.
So, Bernie, for those who don't know your background and maybe just being introduced to you sort of on the national stage, obviously you're running in an Ohio Senate race. That doesn't mean the people in New York necessarily know your story. Your story is pretty amazing. Your family story is amazing. Why don't you tell a little bit of it?
Yeah, so I came here from Colombia, South America as a kid. I'm the youngest of 7. By the way, my dad was one of 11 and my grandfather was one of 23. So we're overperforming Catholics. So we came here to South Florida. That's where most South Americans go. I loved cars my whole life. Ended up going to work at General Motors as a kid. Got the opportunity from a guy in Boston to run a car dealership when I was 26. I'd never worked in a car dealership in my life, but he gave me that opportunity. I worked for him for 12 years, learned a lot. About 20 years ago, Roger Penske called me, gave me the opportunity to buy a dealership, which is very rare. Most of these dealerships are inherited. Took that tiny little car dealership, turned it into a chain of 15 dealerships representing 30 brands, doing about $1 billion in revenue. Sold all of those dealerships over the last 5 years, started a technology company that uses blockchain as the underlying tech to make car titles digital so that states can save a fortune, not print paper, make it much better. I just sold my shares in that company about 1.5 years ago, actually to Stephen Cohen, which is a great validation because obviously he doesn't invest in bad companies. And I'm all in, Ben. I'm all in to run for the United States Senate because we can't let this country go off a cliff. This country means too much to me. It means too much to you. It's about my kids and grandkids, your kids and grandkids, making certain that we hand this country to the next generation in better shape than when we found it.
So, Bernie, obviously you mentioned Sherrod Brown, who's the current senator from Ohio. He's been in office longer than I've been alive, whether he was in the House of Representatives or in the Senate. There are a lot of reasons that you've been knocking his performance in the Senate. Now, for you, what are sort of the big issues of the campaign where Sherrod Brown has been on the wrong side?
Well, he's a faux populist. So this is a guy who says he's for the working class and yet is for the Green New Deal. He wants us all driving electric cars. There's not a working class guy out there that wants to buy an electric pickup truck, and yet Sherrod wants to force that. He's for windmills and solar panels on prime farmland, which is nuts. He's closed down and dismantled coal mines in eastern Ohio. He's for banning fracking, which is what Kamala Harris is for. He wants to ban cryptocurrency because he thinks he knows better than the people who want to actually just spend their money on the things they want to spend their money on. He's somebody who's for open borders. He said the border wall was stupid. He says a right-wing conspiracy theory. He wants to give citizenship to every in this country. We have to deport them. If you're not in this country legally, you have to be deported because there's only one way to come to this country, which is a legal way, the way I came here. And he's also for somebody who wants to give hundreds of billions of dollars to countries that hate us. He supported Kamala Harris and Joe Biden almost 100% of the time, voted twice to impeach President Trump, stabbed them in the back at every turn. So this guy Ben, he's the worst kind of politician. He pretends to be one thing here in Ohio and acts and votes very differently in D.C. People are just sick and tired of that.
Bernie, I think that last point is really the salient one. They do pretend that he's a faux populist. And if you knew nothing but the media coverage, you would assume that he was almost a centrist, that he was somebody who was sort of like a Joe Manchin character inside the Democratic Party. In reality, as you mentioned, he has voted with Joe Biden's agenda 98% of the time. The proof is in the pudding. He votes how he votes.
Yeah, and by the way, it's 98% of the time in technical votes, but 100% when it mattered. And this is a guy who, by the way, voted against prohibiting men to play in women's sports. That's not Ohio values, but this is a state that values its sports, whether it's Ohio State, the Bengals, the Browns, the Indians. We don't want men competing in women's sports. We don't want children getting gender reassignment surgeries. You look at somebody like Sherrod Brown, who's voted to allow men in girls' locker rooms, who's allowed men to go into women's sports. This is not the values of Ohio. He represents even the extreme of Massachusetts. They already have two terrible senators. We don't need to give them a third one.
Bernie, one of the things that's been really fascinating, just as a political observer watching the state of Ohio, you go all the way back to 2000, Ohio was a swing state. Ohio was a state that was seen as, sort of the key to winning national elections. Now President Trump is running away with the state. Obviously, J.D. Vance, his vice presidential candidate, is a senator from the state of Ohio. You've been a resident of Ohio for a very long time. What do you think has changed in the state of Ohio to move it from what was a fairly purplish state to a pretty solidly red state now?
Well, we used to have 6 of the wealthiest 14 cities in America in Ohio. We were the glass capital in Toledo, the computing capital in Dayton, the steel capital in Youngstown, the consumer products capital in Cincinnati. This was a great, thriving state. And through terrible policies, we shipped those jobs overseas to China and Mexico, built their middle class at our expense. And Ohio understands that we need to change course on that. We need to be energy dominant, bring the industries that we can bring back here to America, and create a growing and thriving middle class. And you don't do that by bringing 10 to 12 million in this country. You don't do that by having insane government spending. And you certainly don't do that by forcing this Green New Deal scam down the throats of the American people. That's just not going to work. So they understand that, and they see that President Trump is going to do that, and we can't wait to have him back in office for 4 more years.
Well, Bernie Moreno, obviously, big fan of what you're doing in the state of Ohio. You're the next senator from Ohio.
Thank you, Ben, and thank you for everything that you do. And again, thank you for coming out. You didn't have to. You braved hurricane weather, leaving Florida. Really appreciate it. I tell you, Ohio loves you. And, one of the most touching things was when in Putnam County, they gave you that signed Israeli flag. I thought that was really cool.
Yeah, that was amazing for folks who didn't see the event. It was really amazing. This tiny town where there are no Jews. They actually gave me a flag, an Israeli flag, that one of the people living in the town had started flying right after October 7th in solidarity with Israel. And everyone in the town came and actually signed the flag in solidarity. They gave me the flag. It's a beautiful town. It's a beautiful state. And Bernie, you're going to make an amazing senator from there. Really appreciate the time.
Thank you, Ben.
Joining us online is former Republican Congressman Mike Rogers. He's currently enmeshed in a very close battle with Democratic Representative Lisa Slotkin for a Senate seat in Michigan to replace retiring Democratic Senator Debbie Stabenow. If Michigan flips, Democrats will face a much tougher path to victory in the Senate for sure. Congressman, thanks so much for joining the program. Really appreciate it.
Ben, great to be here. Thanks for having me on.
So obviously the momentum is actually with you in the race. This race has gotten very tight. Just a few weeks ago, it looked like there was a fairly significant gap between you and Representative Slotkin in this race. Now it appears to be in dead heat territory. What is your campaign strategy?
Yeah, so if you think about it, they've spent about $57 million before we got started on ability to put up TV ads. And spending $57 million and having your candidate not hit 50% should tell you a lot. And by the way, they called me and my wife everything but by our Christian names. And we now can come back and defend ourselves. So they spent very early. I don't think it was effective. We're spending now, which I think is, the partial account of our votes coming up. So what we're doing is going in the markets that we need to get our numbers up. Places like Grand Rapids and even Flint area and Lansing area, places like that. Number one. Number two, we have had an unprecedented ground game. And what they didn't see and what pollsters didn't see and pundits didn't see is about 12 weeks ago, we started a ground game that I've just never seen here in Michigan in all the years we've been trying to get a Senate seat like this. Just last Saturday alone, 40,000 doors, just our campaign. And there's other groups here who are helping us on the ground. That is an unprecedented level of effort to try to connect with voters. So we're doing phone calls and doors. We've touched probably 4.5 million people already. And that I think is why you saw our numbers start to come up, candidly. Now we're up on TV, at least defending ourselves and defining her a little bit. I mean, she's now for Trump, apparently. She's now not for EVs, and she's actually for cutting spending, all the things she never voted for in the 5 years that she's been there.
So, Congressman, let's talk about some of the defining issues in the campaign. One of them has been the electric vehicle mandate that the Biden administration has been putting forward. Obviously, that's a huge impact on the Michigan economy. The reality is that even for those of us who love electric vehicles, I have a Tesla, that is not an affordable option for the vast majority of Americans at this point in time. Gas-powered vehicles are going to be the continued future of the American fleet for the foreseeable future. The attempt to sort of cram that down, particularly given the job loss that will then ensue in places like Michigan, is pretty insane. Talk to me about the electric vehicle mandates and where Michiganders are on this.
Yeah. Again, Michigan voters understand what this is going to do. The rest of the country will catch cold on this. We're going to get pneumonia. 40% less labor to build an all-electric vehicle, and 85% of all of the battery component has to be processed in China. That's a lose-lose for a state like ours in a huge way. And by the way, it makes us more reliant on Chinese supply chain, which is something we should never do. And so you back up a second. 80% of people who own all electric vehicles own a gas-powered car. That's great. And I'm not anti-V either. I own a plug-in hybrid Lincoln. The problem is not everybody can buy a second car. And it doesn't work for the average family just yet. The electric grid can't handle what they're mandating. People don't want to buy them. 75% of Michigan citizens said they'll never buy an electric car, right? It just gives you the idea of where Michiganders are. And remember, Michigan is one of the highest percentages of owning American cars because we build American cars. And so you start thinking those numbers clearly, it means a lot less jobs. It means our economy in Michigan is going in the tank. It means we're more dependent on China. And oh, by the way, our electric grid can't handle what the Democrats are mandating our company has to buy or build, and cars that you have to buy.
So, Congressman Rogers, there are a bunch of issues that have come up in the campaign. One of the issues that's come up a lot because of the war in the Middle East has been the issue of Islamic radicalism in the campaign. Representative Rashida Tlaib, obviously, is representative from Michigan. Alyssa Slotkin has been, shall we say, reticent to condemn the terror associations of Rashida Tlaib, the comments of Rashida Tlaib. What do you make of that?
I'm just not sure what Alyssa Slotkin's position is on the Middle East right now. She has been on every side of every issue leading up till today. And I just don't think that ever works. Listen, I've gone into Dearborn and Dearborn Heights and met with Arab Muslim leaders. And yes, they don't like my position on Israel, but there's other things that we can talk about. And I just believe if you're honest enough with them and then you look toward their future about what does your business climate look like, what do the schools look like in your neighborhood teaching your kids, then we have a lot to talk about. Listen, the whole problem to me is this: the Democrats in Washington, D.C., supported by Alyssa Slotkin, unleashed Iran on the world. They gave them money. They allowed them to arm and train the Houthi rebels. They took away the ability for the Saudis to actually go after the Houthi rebels. And so they just kind of festered in a big and growing way, gave them access to billions and billions and billions of dollars that went into Hamas, that went into Hezbollah, and now is entangled us in the Middle East because those two forces are going after Israel in a big way. So now they're in a two-front war, all because of the Democrats' weakness on Iran. And so again, I don't know what her position is. I think my position is very clear. We've got to get the hostages back. You can't have a ceasefire until 100% of the hostages are home. And then you can start talking about a government that isn't Hamas in the Gaza.
And so Congressman Rogers, she's been trying to portray herself as a moderate candidate. She says that she's a bipartisan congressperson. But the reality is, of course, that she voted literally 100% of the time for any bill that Joe Biden supported in 2021, 2022. What do you make of the fact that, as you mentioned right at the top, she seems to now be running directly toward the center while ignoring her entire voting record?
Yeah, I mean, she is absolutely trying to run away from the fact that she voted 100% with the Biden-Harris agenda. And so all your grocery prices, your gas prices, thank you, Alyssa Slotkin, you go right down the list. The fact that we have a wide open and dangerous border, thank you, Alyssa Slotkin. She supported them 100%, including sanctuary cities and allowing, not making it harder for to vote in our election, giving them access to federal funds, all of the things you just don't really want to do. She comes home and says she's, the toughest on the border than any other member. She does it, she's, too cute by half when she does it. The biggest one that got me, Ben, was she on the floor of the United States House had a chance to say no to EV mandates. It's the emissions at the tailpipe that are causing these problems. And she voted for the EV mandates. 2 weeks later, she went up on TV and said, I'm not for EV mandates. I would never tell you what kind of car to drive. I mean, it was the most dishonest pivot I've ever seen. And now running an ad saying, oh, I worked with Donald Trump on a piece of legislation. It's just crazy, which tells me a couple of things. One, their candidate, their presidential candidate is imploding. Number one. And number two, they cannot run on what they have stood for and voted for. They can't do it. And so they're not going to do it. They'd rather be in power than kind of educate you on what their positions are right. And it's been hard to watch, but I think she's being held accountable now. And I think that's why you see the voting closing up.
That race is tight as a tick. In 2 of the last 3 polls, the race is a dead tie. The Real Clear Politics polling average has this thing within the margin of error. So, Congressman Rogers, good luck in the race, obviously, and we look forward to seeing you in the United States Senate.
Hey, thanks, Ben. I look forward to sitting down in person. Look, every little bit helps here, and if you want to change the future of the country, this is the seat to do it. We can win, we will win, and with your listeners' help, we'll get this thing done. RogersForSenate.com. Thanks, Ben.
Joining us on the line is Kari Lake. She, of course, is a candidate for Senate in Arizona against the far-left Ruben Gallego. That race is growing extraordinarily tight. There was a bit of a gap. It is starting to close now. Kari, thanks so much for joining the show. Really appreciate it.
It's great to be on. Thanks, Ben.
So let's talk about the state of the race. Obviously, this has been a bizarre race because Kristen Sinema held the seat, and then she said she was going to run as an independent, and then she dropped out, and basically a lot of her support went over to Ruben Gallego, who is a candidate who is way too far left for the state of Arizona, generally speaking. Why don't you talk about, number one, the state of the race, and number two, why you think that Gallego is too far left for the state of Arizona?
Well, let's talk about the state of the race. We believe that we are up slightly. Our polling has consistently shown us up. I know the public polling has been all over the place, but it's reminiscent of 2016. I remember when I was a broadcast journalist reading the New York Times telling us it was Hillary Clinton, 98% chance of winning, President Trump, a 2% chance. We just got data from a pollster last week who was doing polling in Arizona on the Senate race, and they didn't even have my name on it. You didn't even have the ability to choose. This was it looks like an Ipsos poll. And, so this is the kind of the games they pull. But our internal polling has shown it's a tight race. I've had $100 million in ads dropped on my head, and we're still standing. But, Ben, I look to the people. I talk to more Arizonans every single week than anybody in the whole country. And the people, everywhere we go, we spent the weekend in a very blue part of the state, Tucson, Pima County. Everyone was coming out saying, oh, my gosh, we're voting for Trump. We're voting for you. We've got to turn this around. We can't take it anymore with the border being wide open and the economy in being in free fall right now. We've been all over the state, and we're getting the same response wherever we go. Now, my opponent is absolutely radical. He's the most radical leftist congressman that no one's ever heard of. And he's used that to his benefit because no one has heard of his name. With all of this money from George Soros and leftist billionaires from across the country supporting him, and the Act Blue scheme supporting him, he's managed to reinvent himself and try to convince Arizonans that he's some moderate. But if you look at his record, his voting record, he's voted 100% in line with Biden and Kamala. He's voted to have federal dollars support sanctuary cities. He's voted against closing the border. He's an open borders every single vote. He actually co-sponsored the George Floyd legislation, which during the summer of 2020, when our cities were burning and riots were taking place, he wanted to get rid of the filibuster to pass that legislation, which would have defunded the police nationwide and gotten rid of qualified immunity. He was in support of making sure that Iran had access to $6 billion, which ended up financing the October 7th attack in Israel. And all of his votes on Israel have been dismal. He is to the left of the squad. He's to the left of AOC. He's to the left of Bernie. And you mentioned he's too radical for Arizona. He's too radical for America. He has voted 100% of the time with Kamala Harris and Joe Biden's agenda, which has been absolutely disastrous. Every single open borders piece of legislation that came in front of him, he signed on with. He is for giving the people who've poured across, the millions, Ben, who've poured across, asylum and voting rights, and he voted against the SAVE Act. Now let's talk about cultural things that are so important if you're mom or dad out there. He's actually voted to have biological men take part in women's sports. I mean, I got a daughter. I don't want a man changing in the bathroom, in the locker room with my daughter, and in the shower. This is absurd stuff that the people are not for. He's voted to send federal dollars to sanctuary cities. And he's the one who wrote that nasty letter to FEMA demanding that they take FEMA dollars and use it to settle people who've poured into our country illegally, leaving Americans now who are suffering in North Carolina and Tennessee stranded with no help. This is a radical man. We've seen his background. He's lied about his background. We're finding out now that his dad wasn't just a low-level drug dealer. His dad was actually a convicted felon Mexican drug trafficker. You would think somebody with that background would want to secure the border so that they don't have to deal with the same kind of struggle for other families. Unfortunately, he's done just the opposite. And we know that he walked out on his wife, served her divorce papers just days before Christmas and days before she gave birth to their child. This is the kind of character of the man, Ruben Gallego, and he's far too left for Arizona. And so we got to get the word out. I encourage you to go to kerrylake.com and find out more about where I stand on the issues, which are America first. I'm in line with President Trump. We got to secure that border on day one. It's affecting so many different levels, from obviously our safety to our sovereignty to our economics. I mean, we're competing now, Ben, with millions of people for housing that we frankly don't have enough for American citizens. And on my opponent's own district in CD3 of Phoenix, downtown Phoenix, he has the fastest growing homeless population. There are literally people dying on the streets because he doesn't really care about his district, nor does he care about Arizona.
So, Kerry, obviously you're incredibly popular with the base in Arizona. That's been true for a while here. What's your strategy to reach out to some of the undecideds in this race, to some people who might be on the fence, or to the people who are sort of low propensity voters who don't tend to vote in a typical election?
Well, we've changed up a lot from even the last election. Our ground game is massive. We're knocking on hundreds of thousands of doors since August 1st, and we're reaching out to those people who haven't voted in 3, 4, 5 elections. They're registered, but they haven't voted. And guess what we're finding out? They are motivated. They're like, oh, yes, we're voting this time. I mean, I think the level of despair has reached into every home in Arizona. We're being hit so hard with the inflation and the cost of living in what used to be an affordable state. So we've got a great ground game. We've got places like Turning Point Action. They're doing a great job in not harvesting the ballots, but actually chasing the ballots. And we're already seeing this. We're seeing a lot of people show up early. We're encouraging people to vote early. We don't want any trouble on election day where that's the last day to vote and there's problems with the machines and things aren't working. So we're encouraging people to vote early. And that's what we're seeing around the state.
As you mentioned, Ruben Gallego is one of the most progressive members of Congress. Obviously, if elected to the Senate, he would be far too left for the Arizona population. Even Arizona's Democratic senators have tried to pose as moderate. Gallego really has not attempted to do so. And so I think one of the big questions, of course, is going to be whether he's going to represent the people of Arizona or whether he's going to represent big donors like, say, George Soros in the Senate seat from Arizona. Kerry, what do you make of that?
I can tell you exactly what he's going to do because we've seen it for 10 years. You know, when he walked out on his 9 months pregnant wife, he ran off with a DC lobbyist, and 38 pieces of legislation that he shepherded through Congress came directly from her and her firm. So his priority is going to be his wife's lobbying firm. not the people of Arizona. He doesn't even live here most of the time. He rents out his home, and he's listed on several federal documents that his main residence is Washington, D.C. So I can tell you exactly who he's going to be looking after, and it's not going to be the good people of State 48. And so that's why we've got to stop him and get the word out on who he is. I mean, anybody who's going to push and vote for Iran to have access to $6 billion to fund terrorism in Israel, it has terrible judgment. We know, Ben, that we have terrorists coming across our Arizona border right now. We've got terrorists inside our country as we speak. And to actually cast votes that have killed people, that have caused war, is unconscionable. And this is exactly what he is. And he's lied about it every step of the way. His ads make him look like a cross between Mr. Rogers and G.I. Joe. But we know the fact is he's more like Nancy Pelosi with the beard, and we cannot allow him to be our senator here in Arizona. So we're working really hard. President Trump is working hard in Arizona, and we're feeling a huge momentum shift on the ground as people across the state get out and start to vote. And they're going to early voting centers, they're casting their votes early, and then they're going out and they're knocking on their neighbors' doors. They're calling people in their contact list. It's going to take all of us. It can't just be, the candidate out there doing the work. It's going to have to take the people of this state and this country stepping up and saying, okay, I voted. Now what can I do? What can I do to make sure we save our country? Because our Constitution is truly hanging by a thread. They're going after the First Amendment. We've already seen it. The censorship. I know you've been censored, Ben. I've been censored all the time. Second Amendment, my gosh, they'd love to get rid of that. My opponent is actually for taking away our Second Amendment rights. The Fourth Amendment, all you have to do is go through an airport. We know that the Fourth Amendment's pretty much gone. They would love nothing more than to see the Constitution be pushed aside and have this really totalitarian government in America. And this is the last vote we get to try to save that. It's really not Democrat versus Republican anymore. I feel that we've already passed that. And this is why I'm so impressed with President Trump's movement. He's welcoming everybody in. If you're independent and you want secure borders and safe streets, come on in. If you're Democrat and you don't like an invasion on our border and you don't like having to compete with millions of people for a job, if you want to make sure that your Medicare isn't given out to people here illegally, if you're Democrat and you want your kids to have a good education and not have to have your daughter change in a locker room with a biological man, come on over. You're welcome into the America First movement. This is truly about uniting America and saving what makes us so unique. It's that Constitution that I believe God had a hand in helping write. And those incredible men who came before us, who risked it all to push back against the original globalists, the monarchy, King George. And now we are up against a truly globalist machine. And if we don't get out and vote and take part in this election, we will lose this great country forever.
Kerry, good luck in the race, and hopefully you'll be representing the state of Arizona in the United States Senate quite soon.
Thank you, Ben.
Joining us online is Captain Sam Brown. He, of course, is the Republican Senate candidate in Nevada, taking on Jackie Rosen in a race that has become incredibly tight as of late. Sam, thanks so much for joining the show. Great to talk to you.
Thanks, Ben. It's great to be here. Exciting November 5th here ahead of us.
Oh, yeah. This race is closing very, very quickly. Your internal polling, I've heard, is basically showing the race essentially dead even at this point. What do you see as the state of the race right now?
Look, the first thing is we've had a historic turnout from Republicans. In 20 years, Republicans have never led during early vote, but this year is different. We've seen just an incredible turnout operation, and Republicans really seem to be energized. Democrats have been lacking energy, both in terms of mail ballots as well as early in-person voting. So we're going into this last stretch here with a lot of enthusiasm. People are optimistic, but they also are looking for hope. And that's what President Trump is offering. And that's what we offer in this Senate race to help Republicans take back the Senate majority.
So, Sam, for those who don't know your personal story, why don't you talk about how you got into politics and your story beginning with your service? You know,
I grew up in a family that really emphasized service to country. And so I was a senior in high school on 9/11. And had already applied to military academies, was accepted to West Point before the end of 2001. And so my professional life began at West Point in summer of 2002, graduated in 2006 as an infantry officer, and I had an opportunity to lead some of our bravest and best soldiers in Afghanistan in 2008. Unfortunately, I was wounded on a mission there and had to be medevaced back to San Antonio, Texas, to the burn unit, where I spent 3 years recovering. But what I learned in that is that sometimes our suffering can just be kind of the gateway to even better things. And I found hope and faith, but I also found my future wife in the midst of my recovery. Amy and I have now been married for 15 years. We've got 3 children. Our oldest is 13. Our daughter is 11, and our youngest son is 9. And after I was medically retired, I began to try and figure out who I was outside of the military uniform, and began to pursue my own version of the American dream. As Amy and I raised our kids, I actually worked at an Amazon warehouse for a while I was trying to get my business up and going. And so ultimately I was able to start a small business that helped provide pharmaceutical services to veterans when the VA wasn't able to get their medication in a timely manner. And was just really enjoying life under President Trump's first administration. And then when Joe Biden got elected in office and began to really kind of attack some of the core, fundamental principles of this country, like removing, our border protection, attacking the sovereignty of our border, our energy policy, economic policy, foreign policy. That was a signal to my wife and I that it was time for the Brown family to step up and serve again. And that's how we ended up in this arena here, politically fighting and being just days away from being elected the next senator of Nevada.
So, Sam, obviously you're in a very knockdown, drag-out fight with Jackie Rosen. In your recent debate, she actually suggested that you want to inflict pain on Nevadans. She's been dumping enormous sums of money into this race. What do you think is the state of the race? What's the money race been like? And what do you make of Jackie Rosen's line of attacks here?
They're very desperate. In fact, we knew that this was going to be a very tough fight from the beginning of this year. This was the first race that Chuck Schumer put about $30 million from his super PAC into our race. They knew that down the stretch she was going to be weak. She doesn't have much positive to run on. In fact, she's voted for every Bidenomics bill possible. She's on the Homeland Security Committee, but hasn't provided oversight or pushback on the failed border policies. So they anticipated that this was going to be tight. So in all, they outspent us about 3-1. But we've just kept the faith, knowing that money raised, money spent is not what wins races. It's votes at the end of the day. And so we've worked hard. We've got this thing in a dead heat. It's effectively it's going to be a toss up and see who gets most people out on election day. But when she has these sorts of attacks, and we've seen these attacks kind of ramp up in terms of their, just the harshness and the it's disconnected from reality. We know that they're seeing the same thing in their polls that we are in our polls, and she's just days away from losing this race.
So let's talk about her performance in the United States Senate. Obviously, like so many other Democrats in swing states, she's been essentially positing that she is a moderate in the race. That is certainly not the case. What are your big critiques of Jackie Rosen's record in the United States Senate?
Well, I mean, let's kind of attack it on issue by issue in terms of what the voters are most concerned about. On economic issues, here in Nevada, the average household is paying $1,200 a month more now than we were 4 years ago. She was the vote that set up each of the Bidenomics large spending bills and gave Kamala Harris the tie-breaking vote. She is proud of those votes. She doesn't seem to understand that sort of spending is what has led to the inflationary spending, the higher prices that we all have. Also here in Nevada, our energy costs, whether it's at the pump or at our home and businesses for utilities, are almost double what they were when President Trump was in office. Again, she is for this kind of green New Deal type of energy policies. She is not for American energy security. When it comes to the border, as I mentioned earlier, she literally sits on the Homeland Security Committee, made one border visit in the last 4 years, and it was just a campaign stop, and has done nothing to push back on the border czar Kamala Harris's leadership there and Joe Biden's executive orders. but wants to tell us that she is for securing the border and doesn't want to see fentanyl killing Americans. But when she's literally in a position to do something about it, she has failed. And on foreign policy, Ben, it's something I know that is near and dear to your heart as well as mine and so many other Americans. When the right thing to do was to keep pressure on Iran at the beginning of this administration, she folded like all the Senate Democrats and allowed this Biden administration to lift sanctions, to allow Iran to sell their energy on the market, to go from being nearly broke to enriching its proxy forces and Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, and we see the attacks that happened as a result of that. And she was silent prior to October 7th on the threat of Iran against Israel. So there's failure all the way around, and we stand basically in stark contrast and opposite on each of those issues.
Well, folks, this is a very tight Senate race. We're in the final days of the campaign. Captain Sam Brown, really appreciate your time, and thanks for your service.
Thank you, Ben.
Alrighty, folks, those are all candidates running for the United States Senate. These are all very tight elections, and these elections really, really matter.
What do you feel in your body when you hear the term white people?
I feel like a cringe about it. It's a good word.
White, straight, cisgender man is the top of the pile.
So I'm on the top of the pile. It's me.
Can I just propose a toast? Raise a glass if you're racist. To racist.
That was really weird.
Don't deny that you're racist. Try not to be racist, but also don't realize that you're.
Until we're willing to talk about these things, healing can't really begin.
My daughter's 4 years old. She's still watching Disney movies and choosing a white princess.
Have you talked to her about that?
All the time.
Is racism inherent to whiteness?
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah, probably. Well,
Joining us now is Matt, certified DEI expert.
Did race exist as a reality before?
we made race exist.
Does that make sense?
It does make sense. What do you mean? What you're doing is you're stretching out of your whiteness. This is more for you and less for you.
Am I Racist? Now streaming only on Daily Wire Plus. Rated PG-13.